very much, Professor Alam. I'm really overwhelmed at all of this description that you have provided for me. I'm really humbled. I'm really honored. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So let me share my screen. Hopefully people can see this thing.
Yes, perfect, Professor.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So really appreciate, I would like to thank World Association for Sustainable Development to organize this event, and I'm really privileged to be in front of you. I know that time is very limited, so I will strict my time. So the topic that I would like to talk with you is really focusing on one of my really key expert area is about research. So what I'm trying to do, if we think of the Sustainable Development Goals, so number 3 goal is really good health and well-being. It is contributing to that. But at the same time, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goal 17, really the partnership, it is really important. So I'll try to give an overview, and if that encourages anyone to think further in your area. So the first thing that I would like to share with you is really what is the role of public health research? As an academic, as a researcher, when you do any research, we try to create the scientific evidence on any important public health issue. Then we try to, the normal way that we try to publish, we try to disseminate, but eventually all of these things really mean improve health outcomes, either through impacting on policies or impacting on practice. If we don't do this thing, really, it is not important just to have the publication. And that is the important thing that we always focus. I try to focus on this thing that's called the research translation. I'm pretty sure that all of you know about this. But unfortunately, many of the research that we do, there's a disconnect. So we just do for the sake of doing research, but in terms of the translating into the policies of practice, that is really lacking. Now, if we focus on, if you want to do a public health research, I'm pretty sure that there are multidisciplinary people here. So you will also try to think of really what is needed if you want to do a research. Definitely, we need to have the expertise. It is a team environment. We also need to have some resources, and COVID has taught us that many things can be done online, that we are doing our international conference online today. We need to have an effective communication. We need to have good collaborators. We need to have a timeline, and not to discount the importance of funding. Now, we think of what is the availability of research funding. We all, as an academic, as a researcher, always apply for funding, whether it's national funding, whether it's international funding. It's really competitive. And sometimes, you try, you submit, get that funding. You really feel, oh my goodness, what's going to happen if I fail to get the funding? And with this economic loss, after specifically for COVID pandemic, really need to think what we should do. Should we stop doing the research if we don't get funding? As a part of an academic research, we'll continue applying for funding. But if we don't have any funding, what can be done? So that is the focus really of my talk today. And I'm just trying to share with you my experience, if that helps any one of you to replicate. What did we learn from the COVID-19 pandemic? We learned that public health issues, there is no borders. It is really global. And we need to have multidisciplinary people who can work together to address any public health issue. Is it not the right time to start collaborating for advancement of our global communities? COVID pandemic really taught us we need to have this multidisciplinary people involved around the world, and then definitely it will contribute to the Sustainable Development Goal achievement. Now, how can we be productive in research without any funding? So that is really my experience, my tips, if that helps anyone. So the first thing, we really need to think of an important contemporary issue of public health concern. That is really critical thing. Then definitely we need to have some commitment, we need to be proactive, we need to dedicate some extra time, we need to have an effective communication, we need to share the expertise, and we need to share the resources. It's not necessary that if you think of the developing countries, sometimes I hear all of this, oh, we don't have any funding, we don't have this thing. But now for the global collaboration with this global platform, there are different global platforms. Through this, we can share expertise, we can share our resource. Now, is it possible in real life? So that is the example that I'm going to share. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when everyone wanted to progress in academia, in research, in professional, they wanted to make it right, but it was not really happening. So how I created an example to be productive during that COVID-19 pandemic, and that is the topic that I would like to share. So when the pandemic started, I tried to look at what about psychological distress? What about fear of COVID-19? What about coping? What are the factors? What is the extent of this that's happening? At first, I tried to see this thing in Australia, then I tried to look globally. What I did a cross-sectional survey. Those who understands about the quantitative research method, I did a cross-sectional survey. I selected people who are over 18 years of age who can respond online, and we went to the community settings, we went to the hospital settings, we created an online survey. I'm pretty sure that all of you are quite familiar now with this process. And we created online survey link, we shared in different social media to attract study participants. The first step that we did that study in Australia. We finished that study within 6 months' time. It was a hot topic. We published it in an international journal. And we had the second publication that we did with the Australian data. We looked at the study tools. We tried to look at the psychometric properties and all of this. Then in public health, when we publish it, I also try to, that's my personal way of communicating. I also try to communicate in different media to make it in a very simple language, to plain language, to go to the community. So I try to disseminate this thing through different radio interviews, different blogs, different newsletter articles. And then I thought that, okay, so this is the thing that's happening in Australia. What can you do globally? Then I invited my global collaborators, and I'm really blessed and really pleased to get all the collaborators around the world. And there was a time limit for this thing. I said, look, so within few weeks, if you can get this ethics approval from your local settings, then you are in and we can work together. And the first thing that I mentioned, look, it is really in-kind support that I'm expecting. It is a hot topic. All of you need to contribute, but there is no funding support. Are you happy to collaborate? In that way, surprisingly, I got responses from 17 countries. We finished this study with more than 8,000 population data. And what we found that females had more distress compared to males. I'm just sharing key highlights. People who had existing mental health issues, they were more distressed compared to others. Doctors had more distress compared to others. Nurses had more coping compared to others. I'm just sharing few key findings, what we got, and we published this thing in international journal. And then the first study, global study, we published, we invited all the collaborators in that study. You can see the long list of authors. We published it, and a couple of publications from there. Then we disseminated the study findings in different media, different interviews. And then I thought that, okay, we have done this thing in Australia. We have done the first thing that we did in the community settings. What's happening in the regional settings? We did that study in regional settings in Australia. Because the regional setting, there are different issues, different accessibility, different challenges. So we thought that, okay, what's happening in different settings, in rural settings? So we also did that study, we published it. Then once we finished that study with these 17 countries, we published the global paper. Then we thought, okay, now why don't you publish this thing from your own country data? Because the country issue, it is really specific. Then I worked with all of my collaborators and we started publishing. We published from Bangladesh, Malaysia, from Hong Kong, from Southern Germany, from Kuwait, from Saudi, from UAE. So within about a year and a half, we had 12 international publications without any funding support. Those who are working in academia and research, I'm pretty sure that you will be convinced that it is a really great achievement. We could spend millions of dollars. I'm saying this thing again, I'm not discounting the importance of funding. We need funding. Some of the research we can't do without any funding support. But if we don't get the funding, should we stop doing the research? No, that is my point. So we did that research. I showed this practical example. It's possible to do that research with effective collaboration and with effective research output. After we finished this thing, then I thought, okay, so let's do another study, another global study during this post-pandemic period. So last year, we thought that, okay, let's look at work at university. So I thought that, okay, we are teaching the students, we are building the next generation professionals working in different disciplines. What about health and well-being of the staff who are working at higher education institutions? What about their status? So I tried to look at the evidence. At first, we need to identify the significance of the topic. I looked at the evidence. I tried to look at job insecurity, burnout, psychological distress, and coping. And what are the factors What about the prevalence? What are the extent of these issues among those academics? What is the status of long COVID? What about COVID vaccination? What about comorbidities? What about behavioral risk factors? I tried to look at all of these issues. There is very limited evidence looking at the staff who are working at universities. And when I say staff, it is not only academic staff, but also the professional staff. So in this second study, I initiated this thing last year. We completed that study with 16 countries with more than 2,000 study participants around the world. And we are working on this. I'll follow the same process. We have already submitted the global publication, and we are working on research translation. Remember, I started my talk with the research translation. What I'm trying to do with the findings that we got, the first thing that I'm trying to do in Australia at my university, because my university staff participated, we found some interesting finding. Many people with comorbidities, really they need more support. Many people did not go to the general practitioner for general health assessment. Some of them never check their blood pressure, never check their blood lipid. So we try to utilize this thing. The first thing that I'm trying to do is to create this infographic and then share it with the staff. The second thing that I'm planning to do this year is to do some health promotion activities. So this is not only the research, but how we can improve, how we can change the behavior, how we can disseminate this message among the staff. Once I do this thing, my next plan is to share this thing with other countries so they can also replicate this. Now, if I summarize this thing, really, what are the strategies? If I look back and if I think of what are the strategies for successful completion, I've divided this thing into 3 strategies: plan, run, and compile. If you think of plan, that is the thing that I did at first. Research conceptualization, formation of the team, then taking the lead to develop the research proposal, obtain ethics approval, then run this thing. I engage the collaborators, and regularly I need to have this update. Always had to do all of this admin support. I did not have that luxury to have this admin support. So I need to do all of this thing. And when collaborators from different parts of the world, like today, I had to do this meeting after hours at very late at night. And the communication was really important. And then we also need to have this regular reminder, because it is really important to send the regular reminders. And then that is the compile part. What we did, we worked in the team. Some of the team members worked on data analysis. Some of them worked on manuscript writing. Some of them worked on incorporating graph and incorporating feedback. And then we worked on publication. So it is a team effort. Think of the timeline. Now, if we look at this thing, all of these things was really completed in Australia in 6 months' time. If you think of the global one, it was completed in 12 months' time. So the researchers, the academics, specifically the junior researchers, if you think of the take-home message from today, if you think really no funding is a barrier, it is not a barrier. If you think of the timeline, really, if you plan accordingly, if you work in a team, it is possible to achieve this. However, having said this thing, I should also mention some of the challenges. Yes, it has 17 countries, more than 8,500 population, completed in 12 months, published 12 papers, but there are some challenges that I have already highlighted. Admin activities, obtaining local ethics approval, it was really time consuming. Engaging the collaborators, producing research out, it was really challenging. So what are the strategies that I followed? Really for admin activities, I took that responsibilities. For ethics approval, we need to plan beforehand. When we start working with the collaborators, it's important that we look for who is going to give you the ethics approval locally. And then allocating responsibilities is really key. So, for example, when we did that study, we had to translate into different languages. Which country will do the translation, back translation, and then do the psychometrics? So we divided all of these things. And then it's important to have this continued monitoring. Final tips for success. It's really my tips. What I have learned, the first thing is creating an example. And after creating an example, we must have a timeline. This is really the key thing that I always try to apply. And I have found this thing is really successful. If we don't have the timeline, really we'll continue, probably we'll finish this study in 3 years' time. And the last thing, definitely it's important to have a good leadership that will lead and that will encourage all the collaborators to do this thing. The take-home message is, it's important to identify contemporary issues. It is important to identify the mutual interests of the collaborators, find the suitable collaborators, sort technical issues beforehand, engage experienced people, and definitely we need to have patience. It is really the key. To conclude, Going back to my topic, public health research, is it possible to collaborate globally without funding support? Yes, it is possible. With this, thank you very much for your attention. Really appreciate your time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.